Today's episode of Open Container is presented by Oboes. Many of you already know Oboes, that plucky little brand from Bozeman that stood up in 2007 in a crowded footwear space and said, "There's room for me too." An upstart outlier with a weird name, roomy toe box, and well-built offerings for committed hikers. It's a combination that has attracted a loyal following for 20 years. And we're excited to partner with Oboes because they are committed to shining a light on the core activity to all our outdoor pursuits. Hiking. Hiking. The thing we all do, but no one is talking about. We are unified by hiking. Oboes loves hiking. And that's something I can get down with. Over the coming months, we'll be opening the container and getting on the trail with our friends from Bozeman. Oboes. Love hiking. Welcome to Open Container. I'm Doug Schnitzbahn. I'm a journalist, writer, and overall lover of the outdoors. I've fought wildfires, reported on national politics, published magazines. I've even come face to face with a grizzly bear. On this podcast, we're going to have an open conversation about culture, conservation, policy, business, issues that matter the most to the outdoor community. Let's get some. Dreams intensify when you're out in the wild, at least for me. Anytime I sleep away from all the background noise, the traffic, the lights, the digital pollution we've inserted into our nighttime rituals, I connect better with my dreams. Perhaps this is just part of the reason we go out into the wild, to reconnect with a deeper sense of ourselves. I've also had dreams in the wild that seem to blur the boundaries between logical thought and the mystical. I don't question these. I spent a summer living about 100 yards away from a hanging tree. I never learned the true story about it, but it was marked as hanging tree with a wooden sign. This was deep in the East Pioneer Mountains of southwest Montana near the ghost town of Farland, where I was stationed working for the Student Conservation Association in 1993. It was one of the most beautiful summers of my life. I spent the previous years as a bartender, lost in a bit of a fog, helping people get drunk, living in the city, disconnected from myself. Now I was living in a trailer in an obscure mountain range in Montana, and happier than ever. I drank clean water. I went for a run every evening and would see a great horned owl that would fly along with me. I worked hard building trails. I would look at the stars in the sky and learn the constellations. The trailer was not far from an old civilian conservation corps camp and a more modern outpost of the University of Montana Western Outdoor Center. The camp, I had been told, was haunted. This information was given to me by an old woman named Rose, who used to live up here for decades. The first time I met her, she stopped, looked me dead in the face, and said, "You have the eyes of someone who used to live here." I dreamed of the hanging tree one night, and of two young women murderers wearing white with dark hair, who had not been hung, but were guilty and aligned with me. From then on, I stayed away from the tree. Another night, I saw a ghost. There was unseasonable rain and snow that July, and one night we had a huge storm, and as I slept in the trailer, I could hear banging and rattling all around outside. And then, while I was between the dream world and the waking, I heard someone open the trailer door and take a step in. A figure stood over me. I tried to scream, but nothing would come out, and when I finally did, the haunting was dispelled. I was there alone in the trailer. Which makes sense. Ghosts are not real. Dreams are simply a calculation of the subconscious. Are they? As a child, I suffered from sleep paralysis. It's a horrible affliction, and I did not know what it was until I was in my 40s. Basically, I would be lying in my bed and my mind would be awake, but my body still asleep. I could hear my parents talking downstairs. I could see my room, but I could not move. Then something horrible would happen. A figure would come into my room, something moving towards me, a presence of evil. I knew I had to move. I knew I had to scream out, to do something, but no words would come out of my mouth and my body wouldn't budge as this thing approached me. And then it would be over, much like what happened to me in the trailer and the Pioneers. So, of course, it was no ghost. It was just an episode of sleep paralysis, which I hadn't had since childhood. And sleep paralysis is explained by science. Truly, the body is still asleep, or part of the brain is awake, and the brain hallucinates the terror coming in and tries to react to it. Many people suffer from sleep paralysis, and they describe it the same way. Sometimes it's called the witch because people see a witch like figure coming and sitting on their chest. It turns out that the night I experienced the paralysis, not far from the hanging tree, someone from the nearby town of Dillon went missing in the East Pioneers. I helped a search and rescue team look for him over the following week, but he was never found, and I never heard any report of what might have happened to him. I've had other dreams in the wild, shared dreams with friends, had visions of my home being broken into far away when it was in reality, seen my own life more clearly written down in dreams. I take all of this very seriously. And of course, it can all be explained by neuroscience, by what we know about the world. Yet, our experience of the world feels larger than what we can explain. And that's important, whether it's reality or not. It's important that we connect to this primal part of ourselves, even if we can explain it away to science. Why? I'm not exactly sure. I can tell you the terror of sleep paralysis is very real. Dreams are part of the deep layers of what we are as people. I thought about these dreams a lot when I read Brooke Williams' new book, Encountering Dragonfly. It's a book about dreams. It's a book about science, and it's a book about the deep layers of meaning that humans experience, all the way back even beyond Homo sapiens. We need these experiences, this meaning. I think these dreams tell us something important, and I think we learn a lot about that in Encountering Dragonfly. Brooke Williams has spent 30 years advocating for wilderness, most recently with the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance and as the executive director of the Murie Center. He holds an MBA in sustainable business from the Bainbridge Graduate Institute and a biology degree from the University of Utah. He has written 4 books, including Half-Lives, Reconciling Work and Wilderness, and the just published Encountering Dragonfly, Notes on the Practice of Re-Enchantment. Now let's open the container with Brooke Williams. Well, I am overjoyed to have Brooke Williams here with me, who has been a longtime inspiration and friend. And he is also the author of a book that comes out today called Encountering Dragonfly, Notes on the Practice of Re-Enchantment. So let's hop right into it, Brooke, and let me know, what is re-enchantment?
Hi, Doug. It's so great to be with you. Thanks for doing this. It's always a great pleasure to chat, even if it's official like this is. More than some of
Of
our
course.
conversations. I think to talk about re-enchantment, we need to talk about enchantment first. I always felt like when I heard that word, it meant something like wonder and awe and um, something exciting, full of wonder and awe. But it actually is it's a historical moment when, before the world was disenchanted, it was enchanted for most of our human history. Things had spirits. That's how we lived for thousands of generations until what they call modernity, which who knows when that was exactly, but 800, something like that, when the main thing that happened is we commodified nature from what had been a subject, something that we interacted with. Nature became an object, something that we used and manipulated. Um, and a big changes happened then, and I think we're seeing the repercussions of that to this day. We could no longer cut down entire forests to build temples and forts if the trees still had spirits in them. So we had to just assume they didn't, and then everything followed suit. So it is a period in time which I think is fascinating. That for most of our history, most of the people on the planet have lived that way, and somehow we just abandon it. So I feel like if disenchantment has a role in some of the problems that we face today, like take carbon, for instance. Carbon is a natural phenomenon, and it was in the ground, and then we started to dig it up and sell it and then burn it. And now it's the reason we have what may be the worst problem humans have ever faced with climate change. And if it has its roots in disenchantment, then my theory is that re-enchantment might be part of the solution.
I like it. And one of the things that I think you get into the book, in the book too, is that enchantment itself isn't just simply mystical. That it's also can coexist with science. It's something that you see as working with science, right? Especially when you look at the dragonflies.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a true scientist is someone that's got a real sort of divergent view, and it's not like they're trying to find something. That it's not like they have an idea and they want to find it, but it's this open-ended discovery. And the more I learn about any natural object, any natural species, any natural phenomenon, the more enchanted it becomes, because it is just an amazing force, natural selection and evolution, what has been created and what is surrounding us all the time, and we can't ever avoid it. It's there, and we might as well learn everything we can about it and be as enchanted as possible for the rest of our lives. That's how I want to live.
I want to live that way too. Um, how have you found this kind of re-enchantment in the wild, or how can anyone find it? Are we doing it already? How do you experience re-enchantment?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with object and subject. Again, I mentioned it. I feel like even our as really outdoor people who love outdoor recreation, I think it's possible to objectify the natural world,
Absolutely.
to be really consider something that we use and manipulate for our best days, for our best selves. And if you can look at it as something with which we interact, that is giving us something back at the same time, that's a whole other experience. And I feel like the more I've studied this and tried to understand it, the more I realize that our Native American brothers and sisters have understood this from
Sure.
time zero. That that's just how it is. And I feel like the more that we can live that way, as if we're surrounded by subjects instead of objects, the deeper and more meaningful our lives are.
It's interesting you talk about recreation, and you live somewhere, you live in Castle Valley, where that's your home. It's a place you see on so many intricate levels. Yet if you look right up there in Porcupine Rim, you have a lot of people who are there, some of them experiencing the fullness of the place, but some of them just probably for commodification, right? Just to do the ride, just to see it as
Yeah,
recreation. So you see that
yeah,
dichotomy right out your window from where you live, right?
yeah. The best. I mean, there's 1,000 examples of that around here. Um, and who knows what the mindset of these extreme athletes are, for instance. I mean, I know some of them personally, and I know that there is a spiritual
Sure.
dimension to their activity and their lives, but some of them, they could spread like a slack line across from Castleton Tower the to the rectory and just walk across it, just to say you've been able to do that. I'm not sure how much enchantment there is in that. I'm not sure how much of a subject that is. It's more of an object. These are two big objects that we can spread a slack line between, and we can walk across it, and that's cool. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I've always loved that. Isn't it? Reinhold Messner doesn't want people to climb. Mount Kailash is still unclimbed, and Reinhold encouraged people not to do it. So we do have some of these places that aren't commodified, right?
Well, and didn't he also have, I forget what he called it, was the White Wilderness, where he really promoted climbers to not really map out or diagram or talk about their different routes, because that idea of being there alone in the exact moment, in a Zen sort of moment, can be sort of dissipated if a lot of other people have been there and written about it, for instance. I think that's a
Yeah,
fascinating
yeah. Especially in an age of
idea.
so much technology and so much ability to say
Yeah,
exactly
right.
where we are, that takes some of the enchantment out of the experience, right?
Yeah, exactly,
So
exactly.
how do we find it? How do we get out there and it find enchantment and find re-enchantment, as you call it?
You know what's interesting, Doug, is I'm old, 72, and a part of what I'm about to say is because of that. But also, I feel like my life has sort of evolved from when we first moved to southern Utah. I really like the adventure. I like going to new places all the time. I like sharing little maps on the backs of napkins in bars with people to find these places where not too many people had been before and so on. But lately, it's as if I have like 7 or 8 or maybe a dozen routes that I'll go out and walk. And I think when you see a place over and over again, it takes on a different sort of characteristic. It starts to like work with you a little bit. Um, and I've even gone so far as to um, sort of create mythical landscapes out of the places that I go. And I feel like it is more of an interaction, and you really feel like you're absorbing something from these places if you go there over and over again, as opposed to just kind of hit and miss. One day one place, another day another place. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah.
think that's what I think Wordsworth talks about this in Tintern Abbey, right? Where he talks about being different from the boyishness, the activeness of his youth, and when he gets older, he feels the spirit that rolls through all things when he goes to these places and sees them in a different way each time he goes to them, right?
Yeah, exactly. I remember years ago, Terry, my wife, gave me for Christmas a gigantic, amazing Patagonia parka that is for like, I mean, if you read the description in the catalog, it's for high altitude emergency bivouacs or, these intense things. And I use it for, she bought it for me for my extreme napping that I do, so that I can sit out on a rock in the winter and still be comfortable. And I once talked to Rick Ridgway about it, who works for Patagonia, and I said, I think you're missing like a whole different marketing idea for some of your gear. And I told him about my parka that, it's really for extreme napping, and it's like the hermit parka for me to just be there out in the wilds with something so warm I could stay there for all day, let alone extreme bivouac.
Extreme napping. I really like that. I think that is going to be a new trend. I
Yeah.
think Colin and crew are going to get after that one in Rock Fight and see how the industry responds.
Yeah, I think it's there's a real potential there, don't you?
I love it. Yeah, it sounds nothing better than a nap.
Right.
Getting back to, do you have certain places, in the wild that you return to that you feel more powerfully than others? I mean, are these personal places? Do you think they're places we all feel are kind of part of the Jungian collective, a little bit of both?
That's a really good question. I feel like the more you get to know a place, the more powerful it becomes, for sure. Um, and then when you start, when I like I have, it's at certain places have started to sort of um, give different aspects of the environment meaning just by my attention. I think that's a little bit arrogant, but I also feel like that's a piece of it where places that are deemed to be sacred by other cultures are, I believe, sacred because of the accumulation of stories around those places. And if you don't know the story, then you have to take somebody's word for it or the guidebook that this is like a sacred place. But if you know the stories and you live those stories, then that place can become sacred to you too. So I feel like it's a very conscious um, it's a conscious process I think we're dealing with, where you create your own sacred places by the stories that you leave there.
And this is something I think you get at in the book quite a bit too. This idea that places can have mystical significance because they have layers of cultural meaning put upon them, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And you go far back. You go as far back as to Australopithecus. You talk about Lucy, the
Yeah.
famed kind of early hominid, and her experiences and how they might be part of our current consciousness,
Yeah.
even, right?
Well, when it comes to it, one of the things that, well, my book is about dragonflies, and it's about an experience I had where I had a dream while taking a nap about a dragonfly, and then within hours I was seeing them everywhere. So something had shifted with my attention during that dream, and I couldn't figure out what it was, and it took me a while to come to the conclusion that maybe my life had been re-enchanted at that moment. And um, and what that means is that these creatures that have this natural history of, a lot's known about dragonflies, a lot's known about a lot of different creatures in terms of, what their flight season is, what their habitat is, what they eat, what their predators are, how they look, those kinds of things. But then there's another dimension to it, which is this kind of historic or cultural meaning that's attached to these creatures, but also archetypal and symbolic. What happens when you dream about a dragonfly? What does it really mean in terms of your unconscious and the collective unconscious? And I think that when you bring up Lucy and the fact that um, I can't remember the dates, but that Australopithecus goes back, what, 5 million years, is it?
Yeah, good
Something
Lord,
like
I'm
that.
not sure either. Yeah,
I
yeah.
think it is. But dragonflies go back 300 million years. And so what I started to think about that, and it's like, if they're everywhere on Earth, and they exist on every continent but Antarctica, that every human that ever existed probably had some exposure to a dragonfly, and there was some image that is imprinted on that ancestral brain that we still have access to. So to me, that's like miraculous. That when we dream about a dragonfly, it has these particular meanings based on what our species has always how we've always seen them and how we've always interpreted them. I think that's a miracle, don't you think?
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. That there is this accumulation of human knowledge and human meaning, right? And
Yeah,
I mean, Jung loved this, obviously. Well, and then I love what you do with the book too. Is each chapter in the book is kind of you seeking out a different dragonfly in a different place. My son is a big birder, loves to go birding, and I've done a lot of that. And you're kind of dragonflying in this book
yeah.
is really what it's about, right? And I've never heard of anyone doing that before.
It's interesting because now that I've like been thinking about this for a long time, I've noticed that you buy a field guide and it says, here's how you go find them. I there are places I know I will see them, but I feel like more than anything, I'm just astounded when I'm surprised by seeing them. In other words, I think they're everywhere, but when I actually see them, it's like such a gift, and I have to figure out. I mean, and now what I do is really look at the meaning. Like most cultures um, believe that dragonflies are the messenger between worlds. So if that's true, which I assume that it is, and I'm confident that it is, um, when I see one, I feel like, what message is there? What message am I supposed to be getting from this inner world? And I think that's really amazing, because I think the inner world, um, which Jung named the collective unconscious, is the entire evolutionary history of our species, including everything we ever needed to save ourselves. So, what if that collective unconscious, which, as young white American boys, we grew up with no thought of? It was like nobody really told us about it. We didn't think about it. We didn't know what was going on. When we had a dream, we sort of, I don't know how you were, but I like to have dreams even as a kid, but I never gave them much significance, but I do now.
You're listening to Rockfight Radio. My God, is that Fitz's music? You know it is. Get ready for There's a Smile on My Toes.
Woke up this morning feeling so alive. Sunshine in my step, making my spirit jive. Hopeful comfort wrapping me so sweet, dancing on clouds with every beat. There's a smile on my toes every single day, cool and warm together in a brilliant play. Free range toe box lets my feet sing. Fits is the joy that each new step brings. Deep heel pocket hugging me just right. Fine gauge merino soft like the moonlight. Laughing and skipping, feeling so fly, in a happy place with every stride. There's a smile on my toes every single day, cool and warm together in a brilliant play. Free range toe box lets my feet sing. Fits is the joy that each new step brings.
That was There's a Smile on My Toes from Fitz, because that's what whole foot comfort looks like. New spring styles are in stores now. Didn't get your orders in? No need to cry. Just send Judy. You know Judy. Everyone knows Judy. Send Judy an email at customerservice@fitzsock.com, and she'll turn those frowns upside down. Oh, tell your feet that we said hi. And now, back to the show.
Well, I know that I have this quote here that Jung says that the dream is the small hidden door in the deepest and most intimate sanctum of the soul, which opens to that primeval cosmic night that was soul long before there was conscious ego, and will be soul far beyond what a conscious ego could ever reach. I love that. Yeah.
I get chills with that. I mean, I've read a lot of Jung. I have not read, maybe I've read that particular phrase, but I don't remember it. But that gives me chills, because I mean, think about it. If you consider your dreams like that, that's like the most amazing thing you can even imagine. And I mean, what a gift that is, right? And Jung loved it when one of his patients came to him with a dream. You know the famous story of he's got a patient who's a very powerful young woman, very successful. But she's having a difficult time in a relationship. She's having a difficult time sleeping, and he's been treating her. They've been having many sessions, and one day she comes and she says, "Oh, by the way, I had a dream the other night about a piece of jewelry, I think it was, that was in the shape of a scarab beetle." And so he's like, "Oh my God, this is fantastic. She's had a dream. Let's talk about this dream." But they're in the middle of discussing this dream, and he hears something in the window. And he looks over, opens the window, and grabs a beetle that had been trying to get in through the window. And I mean, so that whole thing just completely turned her upside down and completely changed the effectiveness of the treatment that she was getting, and everything started to sort of fall into place. So that's an amazing idea that a dream can have that kind of power, which I know that because of the power that the dream I had about dragonflies had. But that being said, another thing that Jung did was realize that how important it was that people did remember and were able to relate their dreams to him, but often people couldn't remember their dreams, or they didn't have dreams. A lot of people don't have dreams that they know about. I don't know about you. I have a lot of dreams, but they aren't very. My Terry's grandmother helped me with this. They're not what they call numinous. They aren't real. They don't carry a lot of power. And I maybe have two, three a year that are so powerful that I have to obsess over them for weeks. But what happens with Jung is he developed this process called active imagination, where you can put yourself into sort of a calm state, meditative state, and then you go through this like a story, and the symbols that appear are considered in the same way that symbols appear in a dream, so that you can get the same or almost the same effect from these visualizations. And I'm not sure I really know what I'm talking about when it comes to active imagination, but I do know I like to visualize. And in my book, there's a couple of places where um, I've had questions. It happens to me with my writing a lot where I get stuck. And so I'll just do this sort of a visualization where, it's usually pretty simple, where you go up some stairs and out on a path through a familiar landscape and you meet somebody who has something for you. And it's amazing how whenever I do that, it sounds so simple, and yet every time it's different. And it's like the story, whatever the story I need, it comes out then.
Hmm.
And it's really sort of magical. And I don't know. I mean, you can say all you want about how it's just imaginary or whatever, but Jung would say it doesn't matter if it's imaginary. That's the whole point, is that whatever comes up has some kind of meaning for you. And isn't life more interesting if you consider that? I think so.
Absolutely. Now, I know when I'm out backpacking or when I've been out sleeping in the wild, I tend to have more of these kind of dreams you're talking about, the really powerful dreams. Does that happen to you during your extreme napping? When did the dragonfly, where were you when the dragonfly
I
dream
was
came to you?
extreme napping when I had that dream. That's for sure. But I don't feel like I can really say that that's an issue. When I dream, like I said, I don't often dream really significant, numinous dreams. But when I do, it doesn't really. I can't really say it happens more when I'm out sleeping under the stars or when I'm not. I don't know about you, but getting older, I tend to not sleep really great out for a couple days, for the first few days when I'm out. So the dreams I have are sort of those that in between state where
Hmm.
am I really thinking this or dreaming it? And then the question is, does it really matter?
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
think it does.
Well, getting back to the dragonflies themselves, I love this idea too that once you saw them in the dream, then you started seeing them everywhere. And not only did you go out looking for them, they seem to find you as well. I love the scene in the book when you're in BC. You're talking to a Tlingit man about the dragonfly obsession. You say that there was a Arctic dragonfly was behind him, listening to your conversation, even, right? That you're seeing
Yeah,
them everywhere now.
that was really something. And I think I wrote about this, but I'm thinking about it now. How the idea that this dragonfly had a message, say, between worlds. And here I was literally talking to this young Tlingit man. And when I went back to think about it later, when it came back to me later, everything became a symbol, like it was a dream, and I treated it like a dream. And I think there's a lot going on in my psyche about native this whole idea of native people as being more primal and elemental to who we all were at one time. And you and I don't know exactly what your heritage is, but I come from Europe, and I don't know. You have a really strange last name, so you could come from anywhere. I don't know, but
Yeah, yeah.
I come from Europe, and my people sort of cut themselves off from our native heritage. I mean, we
Yes.
are related to native Europeans, and there's a lot of similarities, I'm sure, between native Europeans and Native Americans and native Russians and native everything else. But that was just part of the story. We cut ourselves off. And I think that the significance of that dragonfly being there as I was talking to that young man had something to do with this that I just mentioned.
Sure. Yeah. Now, another thing I know you've written about before is ghosts or spirits, right? And it being out there in the world and feeling them and having that presence around you. So, um, are there ghosts? Have you seen ghosts? How do you
Yeah.
interact with ghosts
You know,
especially in wild places? I think,
that's
right?
such a good question because, um, well, I feel like I've had experiences with people who are dead. I've never really considered it a ghost, you
Right.
know? I don't know. Do you ever read any Murakami?
Yes, I have.
That
Yeah.
yeah,
Kafka on the Shore and Wind
yeah.
Up Bird Chronicle. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I just love that guy. And for a long time, I read. I tend to find an author and I read everything I can get my hands on until I get tired of it. And so I read a bunch of his stuff maybe up until like 4 or 5 years ago. But then I've just discovered there's two newer ones, and one of them is called "The City and Its Uncertain Walls." And I really think now, as I read Murakami, I feel like he would be a great third part of this conversation, because I think that's the way his mind works, and I feel like you just don't make that stuff up. It's there for a reason. The point I'm bringing up is that in this book, he's there's one of the main characters is a ghost that lives in a library, and
Oh,
it's a
yeah.
very real being, and if that's the definition of ghost, I've not really experienced that. I have experienced influence from what I feel is like important information from another world through dead people, and part of that is Terry and I have discovered this 19th century nature mystic Richard Jefferies, a book that he
Yes.
wrote called "The Story of My Heart," and it was so interesting because we loved the book. We got a publisher to reissue it, and the idea was that Terry would write the introduction and I'd write an afterword. But something happened, and that person, Richard Jefferies, sort of inoculated me or came into my life or something. And I felt like for 6 or 8 months, I was at his mercy. I mean, it was like he was out there somewhere, and he really felt like this was time for this generation to have the information that was in that book. And by God, I was the messenger, and he wasn't going to leave me alone. I mean, it got pretty crazy. Like one night, got home, and Terry had set 3 places for dinner, and I said "Oh, Terry, who's coming?" And she said, "Well, Richard Jefferies. He's always here. We might as well feed him." But I got obsessed with it, And another book I wrote about, and I discovered an ancestor of mine, a great grandfather, who was born in the same town at the same time as Charles Darwin.
Huh.
And I really feel like he was like riding on my shoulder for a couple of years, as if he had information. I mean, when you think about it, if they're out there, if the dead are out there, they know stuff. They know stuff that we don't know. I mean, the main thing they know is what happens after you die. The most amazing question. They've got the answer to that, right? And so I feel like I've had those kind of experiences. And the thing that's so amazing about it is people can just roll their eyes back and say, "Oh, you just made that up." Well, what's the difference? Maybe it had to come from somewhere. Those ideas don't just get like conjured up because of the spaghetti sauce that you ate or something, And I loved it because the Barbara Rass's dear friend, she edited that book, and it was really great because the book was done. They were starting to promote it and try to sell it. And she said, the big question we have, Brooke, is where in the bookstore do we put this book? Is it in fiction or nonfiction? And I said, I really am intimidated by novelists. I have so much respect for the novelists that I've read. I would never want to call myself a novelist. And she said, "Well, okay, let's call it nonfiction." I said, "Okay, but I made a lot of shit up." And she said, I'll never forget it. She said, "Brooke, relax. Just because you imagined it doesn't make it fiction."
Love it. Love it. I love too that you said you were the messenger for Jeffrey. So basically, you were the dragonfly, right? You yourself were the dragonfly. There you go.
Yeah, that's a good point. I probably was.
One thing you
yeah.
mentioned too when we were talking is you were talking about your ancestors, and I know that you're a native Utahn, and I believe your family's been there for a long time, right? And I wonder how
Yeah.
that, and I know both you and Terry are very proud of being Utahns and part of your state, despite conflict you come into with the political leanings of the state at some point. So I wonder how your connection to your home state continues to kind of motivate the work you do, especially in advocacy and conservation.
Yeah, that's a hard question. It's a good question. Brigham Young's my great grandfather, which is not saying a lot because he
Right.
had 26 wives, and I did a little math. I figured if each wife had 4 kids who had 4 kids, I would have like 10,000 cousins at my generation.
Right.
So it's not a big deal. But I feel like a lot of, and I don't know how this happened, but from a very young age, I didn't see that whole Mormon influence as an inspiration as much as something to push off against, like to react to have to justify not believing, for instance, because Brigham Young and the Mormon migration is one of the greatest examples of manifest destiny in the whole world, where an entire people move from one place to another just because of certain circumstances, but also the opportunities that existed. And it's kind of the story of the world and in this microcosm. So it's something I pushed off against for sure. But also, I feel like we cannot really abandon our history and the connection to our ancestors. So we have to, that's who we are. And so people talk about, because of politics, oh, I can't, Trump got elected, we got to leave the country. That's the farthest thing from my mind. I am
Good.
so connected to this
Good.
place.
Yeah.
I mean, I could not just like sever my connections to this place. Like, I mean, my ancestors did. William Williams, who I wrote the book about, who, like I said, obsessed me for those years. He was one of those people that was living a very meager life in England with his family. When the missionaries came along and offered him an opportunity to go to America and Utah, he jumped all over it. But he cut himself off from that entire part of his history, and I think that's dangerous. And although I'm related to him and a lot of people that did that, I could never do that based on now.
Well, I think
what
you
I've
bring up something
experienced.
too that's really inspirational for a lot of us right now, because you've been living, been living in a very red state as a very outspoken conservationist, going against the grain. So you've been fighting this battle for decades and decades that some people might just be experiencing now, right? Of being disempowered, right? So
Yeah.
does that give you more hope for conservation, more hope that some of these policies like that are really going to affect things we care about, more hope that we can fight against them and weather them, and how we can do that?
That's a really good question. I feel like this is just this is exactly the way things should be. I feel like it's terrible and I hate it, but everything has led to this. And I feel like I love that that Chinese term Zujan, TZU-JAN. It means, if a lot of people interpret it to mean like spontaneity or freedom, but David Hinton, as a writer and a translator I really respect, his definition is Zujan is the perpetual generation of the 10,000 things. In other words, this is just moving. It's just ongoing. It's ongoing, and we just have to kind of find the way that we can be just tapped into that force, and I realize that, I mean, terrible things are happening, and more terrible things are going to happen, but we just have to like find the spot in all of it where we feel not only the most effective and the most powerful, but the most creative, and where we get the most satisfaction out of what it is we're doing. And I don't know. I feel like it's been constant. I mean, they always say about environmental work, you have to win over and over and over and over again, but you can
Right.
only lose once. And when I look at what has happened since I've been aware of it in terms of protecting wild places, I look to SUA, especially Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance, and just how they have been so stalwart and so constant, applying pressure where it's most needed, but in really creative ways. It used to be we wanted, what was it? It started out 5.7 million acres of wilderness, of BLM land turned into wilderness. And then things started to evolve. Then it was even more. And then it was like, well, we can't really get a bill this time because of how the Utah politics are, but maybe, we get a national monument back in the 90s, the Escalante Grand Staircase. And then later we get Bears Ears, and then they both get cut because of Trump. And now they got put back into place by Biden, and now they're probably going to get cut again. And that's one advantage of being old, is you see a longer process and realize that whatever is happening is not going to be forever.
That's a good point. What, over your long career in conservation, what do you think, when you look back, where do you feel like, wow, we have made a lot of progress, where there's some things that, were dangers in the past that now we've really moved beyond? Are there any?
Yeah, well, that's a good question too, because I think about, it was even a little before my time, back in the 60s and Nixon, and a lot of really amazing things happened with clean
Right.
air and clean water, and the whole idea of the Wilderness Act itself before that. And I feel like, again, this is just this process of where our species, especially our Americans, have really gone down the wrong path. And at some point, the powers that be are going to have to acknowledge it, because we're sort of headed into oblivion, I think, with what we do one thing, and then we have to do another thing to offset the impacts of the first thing that we did. Damage control. We're in constant damage control. And I feel like the Antiquities Act has been one of the most positive things when it comes to conservation. And I'm sure there are people out there that spend most of their day trying to figure out how to get rid of it, because it goes back to commodification. Like, who's the new Secretary of Interior? Is it Berman? I wrote it down somewhere. Who, during his hearing, he said, our public lands are our balance sheet. That's the whole point of public lands for them, is it's like a bank account that we can spend freely. It's the most antithetical thing to my way of thinking. And after the election this year, I don't know how you felt, but I woke up and I thought, I don't know these people. I don't know this country. I don't know the language. I don't know. I'm lost to feel like this is where we've come to. But I also feel like I've got my work to do, and I'm going to just keep doing it and trying to discover what I can, and I feel like it'll make a difference.
So what would you say to to younger people, to younger, activists, conservationists, even someone who cares about the outdoors a little bit? Like, what would you tell them to do in a time right now when even someone like you feels that way?
I would just tell them to keep getting out, getting out with your butterfly net and your bird book and your binoculars, because that's where the inspiration comes from. That's what I really believe, is that there is this force in the earth that is ongoing, and we feel it when we're out there. It comes up through our feet, and I feel like we're going to know what to do. I feel like we've done this for millions of years, since Lucy. That's why we're still here. That's why we're the most successful species on Earth, is that we respond to we consciously now we can respond to evolution, and I think it's ongoing, and we have to figure out how to play our best role in it.
Well, I think that leads right into, unfortunately, it's been such a fantastic conversation. We're nearing the end of our time right now. And I'd like to ask you the question that I end with every guest on the podcast now. And I think it leads into what we're talking about right now. And that is simply, what gives you hope?
I think that's what gives me hope, to know that I can like put on my shoes and I can walk out the door and I can wander around in the desert and something will happen that will change my life for the better. I mean, who knows? I could get like smashed by a rock or something, but most of the time it's
Sure.
for the better. And to me, that's the most hopeful thing there is, because I feel like I don't even have the capacity. I think hope is such an interesting idea because it means that you have a vision of something that you want to have happen. But I feel like I don't have a vision of it. I just know that there's something positive in the future, and that's because of how it's always been.
I love that. Well, Brooke, I cannot thank you enough for coming on the show. You've been an inspiration for me as a conservationist, as a writer, and just as a good guy for years. Brooke Williams, your latest book is Encountering Dragonfly: Notes on the Practice of Re-Enchantment. It's been such an honor to have you on the show, and hopefully we'll have you back on again sometime.
I would love it, Doug, and it's so great to be with you. And every time we're together, I feel inspired and fortunate to share the world.
Thank you. And how can people find the book, which comes out today, I believe, April 9th?
I'm hoping it'll be in every bookstore imaginable. And, I'm going to be on the road talking about it. So look at your bookstore. Maybe I'll show up there. I don't know. It's just, I mean, I love the whole book industry, that to know that there are these bookstores everywhere that you can just feel at home in. You can find what you need in every town, in every city in the country. Don't you love that?
I love that. Sounds great. Well, look for Brooke Williams at your local bookstore and look for dragonflies all around you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Doug.
Thanks for imbibing Open Container, a production of Rockfight LLC. Please take a second to follow our show on whatever podcast app you're listening to us on, and send us your emails and feedback to myrockfight@gmail.com. Our producers today were David Karstad and Colin True. Art direction provided by Sarah Gensert. I'm Doug Schnitzbahn. Get some. Thanks for listening.